In the 1930s, the Soviet Union was gripped by fear. At its center stood one man, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Communist Party, whose pursuit of absolute power and total control would unleash one of the most brutal campaigns of repression in modern history. The cause of total fear was known as the Great Terror, a campaign of repression that reshaped an entire society through violence, paranoia, and control. The Great Purge, or Great Terror, was not a single event, but a systematic campaign of repression. It involved mass arrests, imprisonment, and executions. No one was safe, not political rivals, not military leaders, not ordinary citizens, and not ethnic minorities. What began as targeted repression in the 1920s expanded into indiscriminate terror by the 1930s. By the early 1930s, open debate inside the Communist Party had effectively disappeared. Stalin's authority became untouchable. A powerful cult of personality portrayed him as infallible. In 1934, the Communist Party gathered for the 17th Congress. Officially, it was a celebration of the Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership. Unofficially, it revealed cracks in Stalin's power. The communist elite knew that Stalin's first 5-year plan had failed in both humanitarian and agricultural terms. Delegates publicly praised Stalin. But secret elections for members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, the highest organ of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union between congresses, have shown significant opposition. Sergei Kirov, the head of the Leningrad Party organization, received strong support. He was seen as a potential successor to Stalin. The communist elite wanted to remove Stalin. On the 1st of December 1934, Kirov was assassinated by Leonid Nikolaev, an unemployed man who was expelled from the Communist Party. This moment changed everything. Kirov's assassination triggered the Great Purge. The purge began in Leningrad, where most of the communist elite were associates of Grigory Zinoviev, who had been the city's party leader for many years until his dismissal in 1926. The purge was then carried out throughout the Soviet Union. In 1936, under the guise of a formal campaign to exchange old party cards for new ones, a purge of communists disloyal to Stalin was carried out within the Communist Party. Around 300,000 communists did not receive new party cards and were expelled from the party. Of course, all those expelled from the party became prime candidates for repression. Between 1936 and 1938, repression intensified during the Moscow show trials. These public trials were carefully staged spectacles that forced prominent Bolsheviks to confess to impossible and imperfect crimes. These show trials were designed not for justice but for fear. At the 20th Congress of the Communist Party, in February 1956, Communist leader Nikita Khrushchev reported that 70% of the members and candidates of the Central Committee elected at the 17th Congress were arrested and shot. The 17th Congress became popularly known as the Executed Congress. The punitive organization was the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the Russian abbreviation is NKVD, the successor to the Cheka. The terror devoured its own executor. The leaders of the punitive forces, Genrikh Yagoda, and later, his successor, Nikolai Yuzhov, were convicted and executed. Many NKVD officers who led Stalin's repressions were also executed. In the 1930s, the Red Army was led by commanders who had won the Civil War, held senior command positions, and whose successes were more evident than Stalin's. Stalin needed total control over the army. The purge of the Red Army began in 1937, with the Trotskyist anti-Soviet military organization affair, also known as the Military Affair or the Tukhachevsky Affair, which was the secret trial of the Red Army High Command. Marshal Tukhachevsky was also a candidate for the Central Committee at the 17th Congress of the Communist Party. Tukhachevsky and many senior Red Army commanders were shot. As a result of the extensive purge of the army, it became an absolutely loyal organization, and in all key positions, it had commanders loyal to Stalin. In the renewed army, the inexperience of careerists was compounded by a lack of initiative, stemming from fear of the top leader. These factors would lead to the Red Army's disaster in 1941 and to enormous military losses during the Second World War. Stalin used terror not only to control the party elite and the army, but also to control the population of the Soviet Union. The goal of the indiscriminate terror was to create a lack of a sense of security among every Soviet citizen, including loyal Stalinists. Terror was required to ensure the unquestioning fulfillment of Stalin's goals, at the limit of one's strength or even at the cost of one's life. Central organizations responsible for repression sent quotas for the number of executions to the regions, forcing local officials to find enemies, whether they existed or not. Regional leaders fear that they might be perceived as insufficiently diligent in identifying and eliminating enemies of the people led them to exceed arrest and execution quotas. Stalin's terror targeted entire ethnic groups. In 1937, approximately 180,000 Koreans were displaced from the Soviet Far East to Central Asia. Terror was not confined to elites. Soviet citizens were encouraged to denounce neighbors, colleagues, and even family members. Trust collapsed. Fear became a way of life. The most remote construction and production sites required free slave labor, which ignored human losses. Slave labor was widely used in the main Directorate of Correctional Labor Camps, the Russian abbreviation is Gulag, which was seen as a successful part of the economy. Lack of medical care, small quantities of low-calorie food, grueling labor, and extreme cruelty by labor camp leaders, driven by fear for their own lives, were the cause of catastrophic mortality among prisoners. By the start of the Second World War, the Gulag economy employed approximately 3 million prisoners. By the end of Stalin's dictatorship, approximately 15 million people passed through the Gulag economy. Many never returned. The Great Terror even more profoundly transformed the social type Homo Sovieticus, which was characterized as a person shaped by fear, avoiding risk, surviving by keeping silent, conformist, distrustful, cynical, lacking initiative, and low in empathy. The Great Terror officially ended in the late 1930s. But its consequences are still felt today. Terror left behind a society marked by trauma and a system where fear became a tool of governance. The psychological consequences of the Great Terror are visible in many modern post-Soviet countries, in which the crimes of the communists were not condemned. When fear becomes a political instrument of power, it destroys the human psyche and pushes Homo Sovieticus to commit war crimes.